friend Tasha's house, and she has a beehive. Look, it's that purple and white box behind me, and the little opening at the bottom is where the bees go in and out, and I think you can see some there doing their bee business. I don't know. We're gonna learn about it though, okay? So the first book that I want to read to you here at the Beehive is The Honey Makers. This is by Gail Gibbons, and Gail Gibbons writes a lot of really, really good nonfiction books. Do you remember what nonfiction means? It means that it's not pretend, that it's real. It's springtime. 2 beekeepers have placed a beehive on a hill. Activity begins around the hive. The honeybees and the beekeepers are the honey makers. By Gail Gibbons. Honeybees travel to and from the hive. Their earliest ancestors lived about 80 million years ago. The scientific name for honeybee comes from the Latin word apis mellifera, meaning honey bearer. Honeybees are social creatures. They form highly structured groups called colonies. In a colony, as many as 50,000 or more bees live together and work at their own special jobs. This is a wild honeybee hive. This is a wooden beehive. That's like the one that my friend Tasha has behind me, only hers is purple. Many honeybees like to make their homes in dark, enclosed places. Often a colony of wild honeybees builds its hive in a hollow tree. Honeybees cared for by today's beekeepers live in box-shaped wooden hives. Inside the beehive, the honeybees are building an amazing structure called a honeycomb. It's made up of countless 6-sided cells. Stored in many of these wax cells is the food that bees and people love to eat: honey. See the honeycomb and the bees? Three different kinds of honeybees live inside all beehives. There's one queen, about 100 male drones, and thousands of female worker bees. Like all insects, bees have 3 body parts. There's the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. Honeybees have other parts too. So this one is a worker bee, this one is a drone bee, and this one is the queen bee. Look. There's their head, and the long hollow tongue called the proboscis sucks up sweet juices called nectar from flowers to make honey. 2 antennae or feelers are used for touch and smell. 3 simple eyes are believed to be sensitive to light. 2 big compound eyes are made up of many eye lenses joined together. This is their thorax. They have a small wing or hind wing, large wing or forewing. The stinger is used only for protection. Only the females have stingers. The queen is the largest of the honeybees, and she can live the longest, from 3 to 5 years. All the other bees in the colony live for about 2 months, except over winter when they live a few months longer. It's the queen's job to make sure the hive never runs out of bees. To do this, she leaves the hive to mate with her drones. Then she lays as many as 2,000 eggs a day. Drones are usually smaller than the queen. Their only job is to mate with her. So there's a drone bee and the queen bee. There's the hive back there. Most cells in the beehive are used for storing honey, but some are used for the queen to lay her eggs. These are called brood cells. In each brood cell, a bee will develop and grow. The largest brood cells are called queen brood cells, also called royal cells. Drone brood cells are smaller. Even smaller are the worker brood cells. The eggs in those cells will become worker bees. Although all worker bees are female, they do not lay eggs. Instead, they do the work of the beehive. So there's a drone brood cell, the queen brood cell, or the royal cell, the worker brood cell, and that's a worker bee. This is larva, a worker bee called a nurse bee. Bee milk is a milky syrup that is full of nutrition. It's made by glands inside of the nurse worker bee. Bee bread is a combination of pollen and honey. Royal jelly is made the same way as bee milk, but it's more nutritious. That's a queen larva right there. Most eggs the queen lays are no bigger than the period at the end of this sentence. After 3 days, a larva hatches from each one. For the next 3 days, worker bees called nurse bees feed the larva bee milk, and they feed it bee bread. A queen larva is fed royal jelly throughout its growth. Each larva grows quickly and then spins a silky cocoon around itself. Inside the cocoon, a pupa develops. A nurse bee seals the cell with wax. Little by little, the pupa changes. It begins to look more like an adult insect. This process is called metamorphosis. Queens develop in about 16 days from the time the eggs are laid. The metamorphosis of drones and workers takes about 21 to 24 days. Finally, after the transformation is complete, an adult bee chews its way out of the brood cell, an adult honeybee. This honeybee is a worker bee. From the minute she comes out of her brood cell, she is as busy as a bee. For the next 3 weeks, she will have a number of different jobs to do inside the hive. First, she is a house bee, cleaning and polishing the cells. About 3 days later, she becomes a nurse bee. She's a house bee, and then she's a nurse bee. And then she's a wax-making bee. After 10 days of being a nurse bee, she becomes a wax-making bee. She makes flakes of wax in her abdomen and chews them to mold new cells or repair old ones. Wax-making bees are also in charge of storing the nectar and pollen that other honeybees bring back to the hive. Other workers care for the queen. They're her court. They cluster around the queen to continually feed and groom her. So there's the queen bee's court. This one is making wax and chewing up the old wax. About a week later, the wax-making bee becomes a guard bee and begins its outdoor life. Guard bees protect the hive. They chase away intruders with their stingers. They also alert the other bees by spreading a special scent when there is danger. A guard bee will sometimes die in battle to protect the hive and its honey. Look, do you think that bear wants to eat the honey? I bet he does. But can you see all the bees are protecting the hive? They're chasing him away. Little bitty bees are chasing away that bear. The worker bee is now about 3 weeks old. She's ready to become a forager bee, her last job, but a very important one. Forager bees are the bees you see zipping from flower to flower. They collect sweet juices called nectar from the flowers for honey making. That's a forager bee. Look, she's getting the nectar from that flower. That says it's the crop or honey stomach. At each flower, the forager bee collects nectar with her proboscis. She stores the nectar in a special part of her body called the crop or honey stomach. The stomach is separate from her other stomach. As she goes from flower to flower, she comes in contact with a yellow powder called pollen. Some of the pollen is collected in little baskets formed by the special hairs on her hind legs. Pollen basket, her proboscis. As the forager bee collects nectar, she carries pollen from flower to flower. This is part of a process called pollination. When she's visited many flowers and her crop is full, she beelines back to her hive. Pollination is the movement of pollen from the stamen to the stigma of the same kind of plant. This makes seeds to grow in new plants. If we don't have bees, then we won't have any plants that grow that make flowers. That means that we wouldn't have any fruit to eat, no apples or oranges. We wouldn't have any tomatoes. Ooh, I love tomatoes from my garden. Honey cell. Here's the honey cell. Back inside the hive, the forager bee brings up or regurgitates the nectar. Then she transfers it by tongue to a hive bee. The nectar is passed by tongue among the hive bees until some of its moisture is gone. Then a wax-making bee places the nectar in a honey cell. There it continues to dry. So the bee pukes it up out of her honey stomach, and then they transfer it by tongue from one bee to another. It sounds gross, but it's delicious. More and more nectar is added to the honey cell. House bees cluster over the cell and fan their wings to evaporate even more of the moisture in the nectar. As the nectar loses water, it becomes thicker and thicker. Finally, wax-making bees cap or seal the cell with wax. Slowly, the nectar ripens into honey. It says honey is about 18% water. When forager bees return to the hive, they have a special way of telling the other forager bees of important discoveries, like a new location of flowers full of nectar and pollen. They do the dances of the bees. The forager, this says the circle dance. The forager honeybee circles in one direction, turns around, and circles back the other way. The dance tells the other forager bees to look for new flowers anywhere within 300 feet of their hive. The dances of the honeybees. The wagtail dance. This dance tells the other forager honeybees that the flowers are further than 300 feet away. The direction she dances while wagging her tail tells where the flowers are in relation to the sun. The number of wags per 15 seconds tell how far away the flowers are. A forager honeybee can visit up to 10,000 flowers a day. All the nectar she collects in her entire life can only make about 1 teaspoon of honey. To make 1 pound of honey, it takes nectar from over 1 million flowers. Also, different kinds of honey come from different kinds of flowers. Honeybees have always been valued for their honey they make. For thousands of years, people have stolen honey from wild beehives. People became beekeepers when they began to make their own hives. Some used hollow logs, others used clay pots. Later, in about 1500, European beekeepers started using upside-down basket hives called skeps. Then in about 1850, the hanging movable frame beehive was invented. So, this is a wild hive up here. This is a hollow log hive. This one is a clay pot hive. This is a skep. And this is a hanging movable frame beehive. On top of the hill is a modern beehive. The beehive is stacked in sections. In each section hang about 10 wooden frames where the bees build their honeycombs. To help the bees build their honeycombs faster, the beekeeper places wax foundations in the frames. This is the entrance and exit to for the bees. The brood chamber is where the queen lays her eggs. The food chamber is where the bees store honey they need for their food. And the honey super is the section the beekeepers will harvest. A foundation is a sheet of wax impression on both sides with a pattern of honeybee cells. So you see on my friend's hive, they have the bottom with the entrance, and then above it is the brood chamber, and then the food chamber is the next one up, and the white one is the honey super, the section that the beekeeper will harvest. My friend Tasha and her husband Jeremiah will harvest that. It's time for the beekeepers to harvest the honey. The honeybees have had several months to build and fill the honeycombs. The colder the winter, the more food they will need. The beekeepers move slowly around the hive. They wear special clothes and use special equipment to protect themselves from getting stung. That's why I'm wearing this veil. A helmet with a veil, that's what this is. White coveralls with elastic ties at the wrist and ankles. White makes the bees feel calm. A metal hive tool is used for prying apart stuck frames apart. They've got gloves on. A smoker calms the bees. They have on boots. Back at home in a shed, the beekeepers use a hot knife to cut the wax caps off the honeycombs. Then the honeycomb frame is placed inside an extractor. It spins around at high speed to remove the honey without breaking the honeycomb. The honey goes into a collecting tank. Next, the honey is filtered through a screen and a cloth to remove small pieces of wax. Then the honey is packed in airtight jars. Sometimes beekeepers melt down old and damaged honeycombs to make beeswax candles and other things. The rest of the empty honeycomb frames are returned to the hive for the honeybees to fill again. For some beekeepers, honey making is a hobby. They use the honey themselves or give it away as gifts. Commercial beekeepers provide stores and shops with gleaming jars of their product to sell. Delicious sweet honey from the honey makers. A beekeeper's yearbook. So this is all the different things that the beekeepers does during different parts of the year. So they have special jobs at every month. Right now it's August. It says activity continues. Some workers are already getting ready for winter. They're patching cracks inside the hive with propolis to keep the cold winter air out. We gathered more honey, fewer eggs are being laid. Propolis is a glue that bees make from plant resins. The end. I love you guys. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.